quick chalk talk about chapter 3, section 1. And this deals with community interactions. And when we talk about a community in biology, we're talking about all the living organisms within an area and how they interact with the non-living things in the area as well. So there's going to be some needs that organisms have, and we can, as we've done all year, look at the basic needs that any living cell needs, and those are oxygen if they are eukaryotic, water no matter what kind of cell they are, they're going to need fuel in its basic form, that is a carbohydrate, glucose, and we're also, as an organism, we need shelter. And there are things in the environment that we'll call limiting factors, and that should be pretty clear to you. A limiting factor is something that limits the ability of an organism to be successful. So we need a minimum amount of the things we need. We need a minimum amount of oxygen, a minimum amount of water, a minimum amount of food, a safe shelter. And those things can be limiting factors in an environment. And every organism's niche, every organism is going to do its best to adapt to the conditions that are there. Some will be more successful than others. Those limiting factors will each have a range of tolerance for their material. So we can survive, for instance, in an atmospheric pressure that goes from not too far below sea level to not that far above sea level, because at those atmospheric pressures we're not going to get the required amount of oxygen we need to get. So we have a range of tolerance for things like temperature, pressure, oxygen levels. Most limiting factors are going to be related to what an organism's particular range of tolerance is for those factors. The other thing that was discussed in this section is something called succession, and that is how not so much the communities would change after a disaster or after the emergence of a piece of land or other place where life could exist, but it has to do with the movement of living organisms into that particular area. And you can start with primary succession. Primary succession is relatively rare these days. It will follow things like a volcanic eruption where lava flows, and lava would be molten rock. When that rock cools, there's no soil on it. So primary succession, although it's relatively rare, is the beginning of life moving in. That's going to require a certain group of pioneer species, which would include things like lichen, so that soil could be developed. Once the soil is developed, other plants come in, and as plants come in, animals are going to follow them. What we see more of is secondary succession, and secondary succession can happen after a forest fire. It can also happen just from normal man-done activities. For instance, if someone stopped using a field for farming, we know we could predict what would happen to that field, what species of plants would probably first start there, and how they would be followed up by more long-term residents, and eventually we would go in this part of the world to a evergreen forest with a mixture of evergreens and deciduous trees coming in. So that really covers what we we're talking about in the first section, and tomorrow we'll deal with the second section. And what we're building up to is some of the major types of ecosystems or biomes that exist on the planet Earth, which is the biosphere, the only place we do have life. Okay,